Was there a real decision made to bring in unexpected talent that would start to really define these films even more individually?
I think as we were entering phase two, the idea was to continue doing what we had done in phase one, which was not just telling new stories with those same characters, but making the same kind of choices with regards to cast, with regards to filmmakers that we had made the first time. And that did mean filmmakers who hadn't necessarily done quote unquote giant movies before, but who had a unique point of view and a unique angle on the world. Shane Black certainly fit that bill for Iron Man 3. When we got to a part 3, I had always vowed if I was ever lucky enough to work on a film that had gotten to a part 3, that I would use that as an opportunity to do something unique. It could be very easy by part 3 to fall into a trap of being too familiar or too similar or just more of the same. And I looked back on my favorite film series, and the ones I loved the most were the ones that did unique things in part 3. Mm-hmm. And those were also the ones that would often continue to 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
For example?
Of course, Return of the Jedi is one of my favorite part 3s ever. Even The Search for Spock, led a new, deep in the mythology of Trek, which led directly to The Voyage Home. We could do a whole interview about Star Trek if you want.
I couldn't.
And this is one, the Friday 13th movies. Jason Voorhees didn't get the hockey mask until Friday 13th, part 3. You think of one thing when you think of Friday 13th, Jason Voorhees in the hockey mask. Weird example as compared to the MCU, but an example of deepening and furthering a film series in unique ways, and often in ways that people wouldn't even realize that hockey mask didn't appear until part 3. It's so inherent with the material. So with Iron Man 3, we really wanted to take Tony to new places. We had a great advantage that the Avengers had been released between Iron Man 2 and Iron Man 3, so suddenly Tony had a whole other level of anxiety that he had to deal with. And the other thing we did was look to television. We hadn't necessarily done that in the past. And I knew there were great filmmakers working in television, and that was how we found these amazing brothers that directed great episodes of television with Arrested Development and Community, and brought them in for The Winter Soldier.
The Russo brothers were just a huge discovery. Did you know at the time that you were going to sort of hand them a huge responsibility of shepherding this series forward?
Joe and Anthony Russo are great filmmakers. From the very first meeting we had on Winter Soldier, where we said, their names keep popping up on these cool television shows that we love. Let's meet with them. They completely understood what we wanted to do with The Winter Soldier. They inherently understood the 70s political thriller nature of what we wanted to do with that film. They're also tireless. They're also incredibly talented. And that led directly into Civil War. And it was midway through Civil War where we said, you want to do 2 Avengers movies at the same time for us.
What did they say?
They said yes, without a doubt. And we're very glad that they did. They also have the stamina required. It's very difficult to make one of these movies, much less 2 of them. And I think their training, a lot of their television work, and more importantly, what they had always envisioned themselves becoming as filmmakers, all was required and helped drive them through to where we are today.
James Gunn was also obviously perhaps the most different vision to bring to your universe. Where did the Guardians of the Galaxy come from? Why did you decide to go down that path in Phase 2?
Phase 2 for us was continuing the stories we'd started in Phase 1 and introducing new stories. We didn't want to be a studio that only made Iron Man films, or later only made Cap or Thor, or even just Avengers films. So it was important to us, and we always knew in Phase 2 we wanted to take another swing. And that was Guardians of the Galaxy. I always wanted to do a space movie. I always wanted to do a franchise set in outer space. And what we had great access to was the Marvel Comics, which at the time they had relaunched the Guardians characters and included Rocket Raccoon, included Groot. And it seemed like the most unlikely group of misfits ever put on screen, and seemed like something that would be incredibly fun. And I loved telling people that we were going to do this movie, Guardians of the Galaxy, with a raccoon in a tree, and people going, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, you guys have gone crazy. James Gunn did have that reaction initially, but as he will tell you, he was driving home and he thought more about the characters, and he started to realize he started to fall in love with the notion of this raccoon. He had an unbelievable take on it. And he wrote a new outline, the cover of which had a picture of the very first Sony Walkman on it. And I looked at it and I went, this is going to work. Because we knew we wanted Peter Quill to have a connection to Earth in a way that most intergalactic outer space heroes don't have. And when I saw that Walkman, I said, he's going to do it through music, which is genius. And that's what he did.
Almost definitional in the same way as the Avengers assemble shot is the police lineup in the Guardians of the Galaxy.
Right.
It's such an ingenious way to introduce that band
Right.
of a-holes. Was that James's idea?
The mugshot lineup in Guardians 1 was James' idea. It was something that he'd put in the script, a way of getting to know the characters, seeing who they were, learning a little bit about their past in this humorous setting. It was so good in the early drafts that he wrote that we knew we could use it in marketing. So we shot it very early on in the schedule. I don't remember exactly when, but in my memory, it was in the first few weeks of production. We filmed that. And it was that very first clip we showed at Comic-Con of the Guardians of the Galaxy Anywhere. And in those quick little vignettes, you got to know almost all of them and where they were coming from and what their attitudes were, what their names were. But it set the tone right off the bat. And that's one of the great things about James. He's an unbelievable filmmaker, great writer, great director. He knows these characters, and he breathes this life into them and can distill them down into moments like the lineup that audiences never read a Guardians comic in their lives, didn't know it existed, can immediately grab onto them.
We also get to know Thanos a little more in this particular film. Brolin seems so perfectly cast. Why was he the perfect person to play this villain of all villains who we're about to meet?
Well, Thanos goes back with us to the very end of Phase 1, to those last shots of the first Avengers film. Joss wrote him in to the script. He just turns around. You see his little smirk. And that really was the beginning of us beginning to seed his grand story arc culminating in Infinity War. And as we were working on Guardians, we wanted to touch on Thanos again and actually see him for the first time. And we wanted to cast a great actor. And we knew we were heading towards Infinity War, so may as well try to get the actor that you're going to use. And Josh Brolin was the idea that popped into our head, the only name ever associated with Thanos for us. And it was our great fortune that it required just one phone call. And he sort of immediately understood what we wanted to do and trusted us. And that's an important thing for us. You meet with these incredibly talented actors. You explain your grand vision for where this character could go over the course of many years. That conversation with Josh was probably 4 or 5 years ago now. But that one day he'll be the star of his own movie and it'll be a great thing. I imagine people in Hollywood talk like that all the time, and 90% of it doesn't come to fruition. And it's always important to me that what we pitch these actors, we deliver. More importantly, Josh Brolin delivers an unbelievable performance. So he sat in his chair in his big Thanos throne for that one scene in Guardians, with the promise that he would have a showcase role in Infinity War down the line. What Josh has done, and of course we can't talk about it too much because nobody's seen it, but what he's done with that character and that performance is overwhelming, is astounding. He's an amazing talent.
So Ultron obviously was another climax for a phase, and it seemed such a compelling tying together of a lot of the conflicts that have been happening, particularly around Stark and trying to contain technology. Right. Why was he the perfect villain for that second Avengers film?
The notion of Ultron as the bad guy in the second Avengers film goes back to conversations we had with Joss during production of the first Avengers film. I remember being in the lab set on the helicarrier and started talking about Vision, and started talking about Ultron, and started talking about Tony being the one to create Ultron, and that it being a spin-off, that here Vision being a spin-off of Jarvis, which had taken off in the Iron Man series. From that point, it was just a given that Ultron was going to be the bad guy in the second Avengers film, which was great because it also tapped into this angst that Tony Stark continues to carry with him through Infinity War. This man who had this wonderful redemption arc and doesn't sell weapons anymore and doesn't want to contribute to the ills of society, and suddenly being exposed to aliens and other worlds and other threats from beyond in Avengers, and how that affects a man who's a futurist and who constantly is looking for ways to solve problems. And his way in Age of Ultron went awry, which only causes him more angst.
It's followed by Ant-Man, which is a fabulous chaser in a sense, because it is a little lighter and smaller than Ultron, which is so epic. Obviously, the story leading up to Ant-Man with Edgar coming off the project. He said that Marvel didn't want to make an Edgar Wright movie. Is that a fair assessment of what happened with him leaving the project?
No, I think that the idea with Ant-Man was always to do a heist film, right, and talk about different genres. Leading up to it, the adventure film, the sci-fi fantasy film, the space opera. We wanted to do a heist film with Ant-Man. And what Peyton was able to do when he came on board, totally understood that conceit and that promise. And the amazing cast that had come together on that film. Michael Douglas, which was unbelievable to work with, and Paul Rudd, who had been a comedy star, but suddenly stepping into the superheroics, not in a completely different way than Robert had done, and becoming these iconic characters. The placement of that movie also, on the heels of Avengers, do a giant movie with Age of Ultron, then do something figuratively and literally much smaller with Ant-Man to continue to surprise people. Does that not answer your question at all?
I think it's as good as we're going to get on that one.